20.
Hey. Hey, time to wake up, kid.
A persistent tapping on his face forced Chesney out of his unconsciousness. Through half-lidded eyes, he got a glimpse of an unfamiliar place, and then he suddenly jolted awake. Like a shot, he stood up and knocked the chair back he had been sitting in. He spun to take Cormu's sword from the sheath beside him, only to find it empty.
Whoa, calm down, son,
the voice said again.
You're not in any danger.
Finally, he looked at the voice. The man in front of him was an old Doru man. Short hair somewhere between gray and purple, long pointed ears that were even taller than his head, an eye patch over his right eye, big fluffy mustache, and wearing dark gray camouflage clothes. With his hands up in a placating manner, the man backed away and sat down on a chair behind a simple desk.
Please, have a seat. Let's all just have a talk. All?
Chesney asked, which is when he turned to find Midia and Fastjo both in chairs next to him. Midia's face was definitely on the sour side, and her arms were crossed in front of her chest. Fastjo, on the other hand, seemed a bit pale. Chesney walked back and got his chair he had knocked down, and sat in it. He noticed off to the side were all their weapons and armor. And also, they were very much not alone. A random assortment of Fi-Orla and Doru adults, all wearing similar camouflage, were lounging in the vicinity. They were in some kind of cave, lit by wall-mounted light, and it looked like there were several interwoven passages, not all of them natural.
Well, if we are going to talk, how about explaining why you just tried to kill us?
Midia growled. The man smiled evenly, and said,
Certainly. Just as soon as you tell us why a couple of Nasquat children are smack dab in the middle of enemy territory, in the middle of a war.
His voice was hoarse like a habitual smoker's, though he wasn't using any now. His eyes trailed over to Fastjo.
Care to explain, old friend?
Fastjo just grimaced. At Chesney's questioning glance, he sighed and said,
This is Grunt, leader of one of the resistance factions here in Sasquatch. Congratulations on your promotion, by the way.
Grunt grunted.
Promotions aren't happy things here. You know that better than anyone. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Grunt sighed, then said,
Alright, as a gesture of goodwill, I'll explain ourselves first. We'd received intelligence that this rope network was being used extensively by the Sasquatch military to move around supplies. When we rigged the bombs, we expected to find crates filled with food and weapons. Instead, we find a couple of kids and an old comrade. Now, I don't much like coincidences. Don't trust 'em. So it makes me wonder what a group like yours could possibly be doing here in Sasquatch. So, we healed you up, dragged you back here, and now, I'd like some answers. So, you're saying you're not with Zagos, then?
Midia asked.
We'll never follow that maniac,
Grunt replied. Several of the onlookers agreed quietly. She then leaned over to Chesney.
Alright, what do you think? Should we tell them?
She made no attempt to hide her voice, as the attempt would have been pointless in the claustrophobic room. He crossed his arms, and looked at her.
I don't know. Why don't we just take our stuff and leave?
Grunt chimed in.
Excuse me, you won't be taking anything until we finish our little chat.
They continued in their conversation, ignoring him.
We could, but you're forgetting that we could really use as many helping hands as we can get. Chesney, we need friends. Friends is one thing, but I don't want to get dragged into every little conflict over here either. We have one job, and time is of the essence. Exactly my point. Instead of marching ahead blindly, some local help will almost assuredly speed things along.
A few heartbeats passed before he responded.
You really think we should trust them? I think we should try, yes.
He looked over at Grunt. The man didn't seem to be particularly happy about being ignored in this exchange. Chesney wasn't concerned. Weapons or no weapons, this place couldn't hold them if they wanted to leave. Eventually, Chesney agreed that trying to make friends was the better idea. He explained in simple terms what had happened in Asquat, and their purpose of destroying Noai Gren using Cormu's equipment. Of course, he left out his and Midia's heritage and a lot of messy parts. Grunt listened intently, and his crew stayed silent as he explained. By the end of it, there seemed to be quite a few whispered opinions all around, most incredulous. Eventually, Grunt responded after taking a moment to consider what he'd learned.
So, you really think that by using Cormu's equipment, you can stop Noai Gren?
Chesney nodded.
And Dahlgren. That's what Daphne told us, and so, I believe her. And those over there are actually his things? How did you get them, really? I already told you. We got the sword from Strabo, we stole the helm from the consecrated grounds of the Helm Temple, and Joanne gave us the armor. And what's to stop us from just taking them and using them ourselves? You're just a kid. Won't work for you. Tell you what, if I can take you down while you wear the equipment, will that satisfy you?
Nobody seemed particularly happy with that idea, and even Midia subtly shook her head. Thankfully, Grunt didn't rise to the bait.
No, I don't think we will be doing that. All right, kid, let me give it to you straight.
He got up and walked around the desk to sit on it, much closer to their chairs.
You all might be who you say you are, but for all we know, you're some of Zagos's spies. You think he'd really be able to convince anyone from Nasquat to help him?
Midia asked incredulously. Chesney didn't feel like reminding her that Duke, willingly or not, seemed to have been duped into helping with Zagos's plans. He couldn't even be 100% sure that Zagos had planned on activating Dahlgren, but he certainly didn't believe in coincidences. Duke had paid for it with his life. There's nothing Zagos wouldn't do to get his way, it seemed. Apparently, Grunt agreed.
That monster would do anything if it meant victory. For all I know, he has your family as hostage. So, instead, we're going to get you to do a little job for us, which will help prove your intentions.
Here we go, he thought to himself. Even knowing it was coming was cold comfort. Grunt continued.
As it so happens, one of our operatives was recently captured in Conshudo. The job is simple. Rescue her, and bring her back here safe, and we'll recognize you as our comrade. And comrades help each other. What do you say?
Eyeing them both, Grunt seemed to be chewing on his own tongue while waiting for their response. The pair turned to look at each other.
Well, I'm not sure how much choice we have here, Midia,
Chesney said. She smirked.
After all we've been through, how hard could it possibly be? Very true.
He turned to Grunt.
Fine, we're in.
Grunt nodded.
Glad to hear it. Only, there's still the little problem of me not being able to fully trust you. So, the young miss will stay here as my hostage, and I'll be joining you in her place.
The smirk Midia was wearing instantly vanished, and she paled. Chesney leaped to his feet and said in as menacing a voice as he could muster.
You're crazy if you think I'm going to leave any of my friends here.
The room started to get very hot, and the group of onlookers began to murmur, as Chesney and Grunt stared each other down unflinchingly. Already, Chesney's mind raced, thinking of his next moves, measuring how long it would take to run to his sword, and which spells would be most effective in this cramped space. To his surprise, he was jolted out of his stare down with Grunt by Midia, placing a placating hand on his arm.
Chesney, calm down. It's okay. No, it's not okay,
he shouted back.
I'm not letting anything happen to you.
He could see her face twist between fear and neutrality.
Chesney, I know I said I'd follow you anywhere, and I meant it. I still mean it. But, this one time, just this once, I'm willing to stay behind, so we can move forward.
His anger faltered into confusion. He couldn't believe she was okay with this idea. Grunt asking Midia to be his hostage. It suddenly felt like he was asking him to cut off his own arm.
Midia, are you sure? We don't need to do this. We can find another way.
She swallowed, and mastered her face to show serene calm.
I know we can, but I think this is the best way. I really, really do. So, I want you to know that I trust you. I know you'll come back for me, no matter what. So, please, trust me that I think this is the best thing for us to do. Okay?
Half a dozen protestations died in his throat. He felt paralyzed. But the pleading look in her eyes made the gears click into place in his brain, and he took a breath, and really thought about it. The room started to cool. Could he really leave her behind in a place like this? With a group he'd never met, that had almost killed them on bad information? It seemed so irresponsible. What would her father say, if he told her he had left Medea here, and something had happened? His eyes scanned the room. Everywhere was another tense face, hands close to weapons, or pressed up against a wall or supply crate, waiting for a pin to drop. He knew they could fight their way out of here, but could they really afford to fight literally everyone in Sasquatch? There were a few faces, all of them women, looking at their commander with very disapproving expressions. His mouth tasted sour. If anyone else had asked this of him, he'd never have agreed. But it was Medea. Practically pleaded with him to consider it.
Fine, but I have some conditions of my own. I'm all ears, kid,
Grunt said, laughing a bit at his own joke.
First, Fast Joe. You know he's fine, so let him go.
Fast Joe was taken by surprise.
Chesney, are you sure?
He nodded.
I know you left the resistance for your own reasons. I don't want you forced back into it again, especially not for my sake. Chesney, that's... I don't.
He began to say, but eventually his eyes turned to gratitude, and all he said was,
Thank you.
The resistance leader seemed to mull this over for a moment, before finally saying,
Fine. Anything else? Lastly, while we're on this little excursion, I'm in charge. You take your cues from me. Think of it as you being my little hostage too.
The onlookers balked, but Grunt barked out a laugh.
Damn, kid, you got some balls on you. But, fine, I'm all yours. But just so we know you won't just kill me out of spite, I'll take Gunny over there along too, just so we all stay honest.
He pointed to a gargantuan form leaning against the wall. Another Doru man, but the muscles of his arms were the same size as Chesney's legs. The uniform didn't even fit properly on him. Incredulously, Gunny pointed to himself and seemed to be asking,
Who, me?
Imposture alone.
Fine.
Chesney agreed, not intimidated in the slightest.
It won't make a difference. Just make sure neither of you get in my way.
Grunt clapped.
Then, we're all agreed. Let's get ready. We leave within the hour.
The cave became a bustle of movement as everyone suddenly had a mountain of work to do somehow, even if it was just the three of them going. He barely paid them any attention, as he turned back to Medea.
Are you absolutely sure about this?
She gave him her best action girl smile.
Oh, don't you worry about me. I'll be fine. Don't forget, I can bring this whole place down if I really want to.
He wasn't convinced at all. He grabbed her in a fierce hug.
Stay safe, okay? No matter what.
His mind may have been playing tricks, but he thought her voice hitched just a little when she said,
You too, okay? Come back safe.
Half a dozen heartbeats later, he let her go, and started to get ready. While he was reassembling himself, a woman approached him. She had long ears like a Doru, and she had the basic build of one, but she also had a green forehead plate he normally saw as a Fiorla trait. He didn't know nearly enough about the Sasquatch races to know if that meant she was one, the other, or a Lubot, though. Her hair was somewhere between yellow and green, drawn back in a ponytail. Her eyes were emerald green too. Her expression was a serene but serious one.
Hey, I just wanted to say something. We and the other girls will make sure she's safe, okay? You really don't need to worry. I'm fiery, by the way.
She even extended her hand for him to shake. Chesney glanced between her face and the hand. He decided to take it.
Hey, I'm Chesney. And you promise?
Her face completely serious, she nodded.
None of us are particularly happy about holding a little girl hostage. We'll take good care of her. So don't worry about that.
He nodded.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And don't worry about the mission. We'll get it done, and everyone will be back safe. I guarantee it. Bold words, Chesney. I hope you can back them up. Endings are rarely happy for long here in the Resistance. Well, you never had me before.
Before he left, he made sure that Fast Joe was ushered out a secret entrance that would have taken him closer to his home in the minstrel tent after another round of tearful hugs. They journeyed together for so long that it was strange seeing him leave, but he knew in his heart that it was the right decision. His mind felt more at peace knowing he and Wild were going to be safe. At last, the trio assembled at the cave mouth with a full crowd of Resistance fighters, solemnly seeing them off. He stole one last glance at Medea, who gave him her best smile and a thumbs-up He nodded, and returned the gesture. Then, they stepped out into the light of day, and began their march. Medea had been holding herself together amazingly well, until that last look he had turned to give her. When their eyes met, it was all she could do to not let her face shift and crumble. She was not worried about herself, not really. Several of the women had already come to her to comfort her and assure her of her safety. But this was the first time in months that Chesney's protection was completely out of her hands. She had followed him into danger and death countless times, into fire, and the maws of dragons, into the very sky, though she trembled in fear the whole way. Yet nothing was as scary as the worry that now gnawed on her heart, that something would hurt him while she could not protect him, that something would steal him from her while she was forced away from his side. She kept it together even as he nodded at her and returned her thumbs-up But the second his head turned away and he moved out of the cave, her jaw trembled. She brought a hand to her mouth to muffle the sob she struggled to suppress. "Please, don't turn around. Please, don't see this." She couldn't bear to poison his thoughts on this journey, to make him worry about her while he went and risked his life. To her eternal gratitude, he did not turn around again. When she was sure that no sight or sound would escape the mouth of the cave and find his ear, at last she gave in to the pressure of her heart and sank to her knees. At last, her composure dissolved. The women surrounding her all exchanged knowing looks, knelt down, and gently embraced her to them. "Sophie, please, if you can hear me, bring him back safe." There were two paths they could take to Consciuto, Grunt advised him. By going the northeast path, they would wander a dense wood before coming out at the northern shore of a huge patch of sand dunes, which Consciuto was in the middle of. Conversely, if they went southeast, they would instead ascend and then descend a steep plateau and arrive on the sand dunes' southern shore. Apparently, there wasn't a nice way just east. Not wanting to get turned around and lost in the wood, Chesney opted to go south. The traveling was tense. Not only was it beyond weird to be ordering around a 40-year-old man and another guy who was practically 4 times his size, but he was constantly turning and expecting Medea to be there, and his mind didn't know how to cope with her being gone. To add to his troubles, the chief danger in this part of Asquat was a much hardier variety of split bug called a wolfworm. Not only would it split into 2 new creatures if physically attacked, but their electrical discharge attack was far more wide-reaching and potent. And, on top of that, they could take a truly serious beating without floundering in the slightest in their aggression. This, of course, was all exacerbated by the fact that Chesney was the only spiritualist in the group. So he routinely had to choose between being the only person who could attack the creatures, draining him with spell after spell, or allowing his companions to attack as well, thus doubling or even quadrupling the amount of attacks they had to fend off when the bug split into new forms. By the time they reached the southern shore of the sand dunes, they all needed quite a lot of minoxidil. Grunt, at least, had his own bottle of ibuprofen, though they hadn't needed it yet. Regardless, he was exhausted already, and they hadn't even begun to cross the desert. Far in the distance, Chesney could just barely make out some squiggles on the horizon that must be Conchita. The others confirmed his assumption. Mostly, they walked silently over the dunes, but you can only travel and fight with people for so long before someone starts a conversation.
I have to say, kid, you fight very well for someone your age,
Grunt said from a few paces away. He considered responding with something sarcastic, but the thought of Midia reminding him they needed friends filled his mind, so he tried to be nice.
Well, thanks. I only started a few months back. Fighting for your life every day is a strong motivator. I know you talked a bit about what happened over in Asquat, but it sounds like there's more to the story.
Chesney sighed, pondering how much to say. Honestly, he was too tired for any kind of subtlety.
Yeah, Matt, the horrible dragon thing that came from Dahlgren, left quite the trail of devastation in its wake. I just happened to run into every single one of the messes it left behind.
He figured this was a good point to turn things back on his questioner.
How about you? How long has the fight against Zagos been going on?
Grunt, true to his nickname, grunted before replying.
About a decade, plus or minus a few years. I've only been involved for the last 5 or so. Same story as everyone. Zagos took something from me, and I'll fight till my dying breath making sure he can't sleep at night.
Chesney nodded.
Yeah, He seems to have that effect on people.
A few moments later, he turned to Gunny.
You know, while we're talking, this has been on my mind all day. Do you usually fight with a gigantic tree trunk and crag of rock?
While Grunt fought with knives and a small club, Gunny was back there carrying a freakishly heavy tree trunk and rock, like it was nothing to him. He was able to swing it with relative ease, and every time he struck, it was like the ground shook in a mini-earthquake.
Yup.
Chesney rolled his eyes.
Not much of a talker, eh?
Grunt chuckled in that dusty old voice of his.
Don't mind him. Gunny's a real softy at heart. Works harder than anyone. Is that why you asked him to come? Because he's a real softy?
After a beat, Grunt said.
Well, that, plus he silences a room real quick when he enters.
The trek through the sand was somehow worse than trekking through the swamps near Duber had been. At least with the swamp, he was constantly having to think and choose his footing carefully. Here it was just a never-ending slog. There was nothing he could do to make the going less awful, just simply grit his teeth and bear it. Once more, he turned to look at Midia's empty space beside him, a question for how she was holding up dying on his lips.
Will you stop doing that?
Grunt complained.
I keep getting spooked, thinking there's someone behind us. Sorry.
A pain had been building in his chest since leaving her behind. At first, he thought he was imagining it. Then, he thought maybe he hadn't been healed completely from the explosion. But he found the longer he traveled, and the more his mind spun in circles worrying after her, the more his chest literally hurt to the point he thought he might need to stop and take a break. Evidently, even Grunt noticed.
You doing okay, kid?
He began, not sure what he would even say.
I don't know. You know,
Grunt began to say, slowly, while easing their pace a little.
The phrase, broken heart, isn't just poetry. What do you mean? People die from grief. When you find it, live it. Love becomes a thing your body needs, and when it's gone, sometimes a body can't cope. Broken hearts, loneliness, worry. It's not just a metaphor. It doesn't just hurt emotionally. It's a real wound. Whoa, hold on second. We're not like, in love, or anything.
Chesney sputtered, waving his hands emphatically. It took another dozen steps before Grunt spoke again.
You sure about that, kid?
When Chesney couldn't respond or even look at him, Grunt continued.
Take it from an old man who knows. Right now, if you knew she was in danger, would anything stop you from rushing to her side?
He didn't know how to process this information. His heart and his mind twisted in every way they could stop him from thinking about this. But even just thinking of her in danger made his skin prickle cold, and his heart hammer in his chest. Grimly, Grunt whispered,
"You might even be desperate enough to trick a kid into running into a trap with you."
That sent his mind on a wild left turn.
Wait, what? Is that about who we're rescuing?
To his surprise, Gunny was the one to chime in here.
Yup. Grunt's partner got captured. He'd been going crazy for days trying to make a plan, when you three showed up. Oh, shut up. Now you decide to talk, you lunk.
He wanted to respond in several different ways all at once. Teasing, sarcastic, even angry. But that was also the first hint of vulnerability that he'd witnessed from the old man. And on this one particular topic, he could deeply empathize. Was there a low to which he would not stoop if it would keep Medea safe? No, there wasn't. He didn't even have to think about it. He just knew. Chesney asked,
"How much time do we have?"
With a subtly pained look, Grunt admitted,
"I don't know."
Nodding, Chesney grabbed the straps of his pack and said,
"Then let's pick up the pace."
Hot, tired, and out of breath, the trio emerged from the dunes onto something that seemed to resemble a road that led them the last legs of their journey. The sand here was packed down and sturdy, as if it were regularly traveled, and no longer shifted with the blowing Sasquatch winds. Ahead, Conchito loomed, like a gleaming pale monument in the desert. The city was surrounded by a smooth tan stone wall, topped with decorative parapets. The walls were too high to see past, but from the center of town stood a great tall tower that had to be at least 6 stories tall. They also found that they weren't alone on this road. There seemed to be a great procession of people, and carts, and merchants into the desert city.
"Well, this will certainly help us blend in, but I don't think I've ever seen the city so busy,"
Grunt remarked.
"This can't be a good sign." "Why do you say that?"
Chesney asked.
"Zagos is a fan of public executions, and those are real popular with the locals."
A half-dozen images of what that could entail filled Chesney's mind, and he shook his head incredulously.
That's horrible. And people go to watch it? On purpose?"
Grunt gestured to a family of 3, a mother and father, smiling and holding the hands of their daughter, who seemed incredibly excited as they proceeded into the city. Chesney was at a loss for words. How could a society be this sick? How could all these regular people just be so callous and cruel? He couldn't understand it, and doubted he ever would. But he was quickly losing any sympathy he had for the people of Sasquatch and the tyrannical dictatorship they seemed to be operating under. It was then that Chesney heard something. There was a voice, but he couldn't place what it was or where it was coming from. Nobody else seemed to hear it. Not Grunt or Gunny, and not the passers-by. Without even thinking, he started turning about trying to place the sound. To one side of the road was a steep drop down a sand dune, and at the bottom, he found what the voice was coming from. A blonde Fi-Orla woman, with a light green forehead carapace plate, had fallen. She was on her back with a heavy pack underneath her, trying to shout for help and scramble to turn herself over, but the positioning of the sand made it impossible for her to get a grip. As it was, she kept dislodging more and more sand around her, and she was in danger of being buried. For a dozen heartbeats, he looked at her dispassionately. Wasn't it justice for a girl who was coming for a public execution to die so slow and cruel a death? The instant he thought it, he was filled with disgust. Hadn't he just congratulated himself for being merciful to that stranger Zeron? The look of desperation in her eyes as she saw him made him put aside his own feelings. He was disgusted both in Sasquatch for its cruelty, but also himself for thinking of letting a woman die in front of him. This wasn't the time for either of those things. He slid down the side of the dune to get to her.
"Hold on. Stop squirming." "Okay,"
she managed, squinting and trying to keep her face above the pouring sand. In moments, He was beside her, grabbing her hands and trying to hoist her upright. Damn, I really could use that strength spell Midia has right about now. His work turned out to be useless, however, as Gunny slid down, scooped her up in one hand, and set her down.
Safe now, lady. Holy, that was incredible.
She spluttered, shaking the sand out of her clothes and looking Gunny over.
You're my hero for saving me like that.
Gunny gestured over to Chesney.
Thank the kid. He was the one who heard you.
What the? Don't drag me into this, Chesney thought to himself. The woman grasped Chesney's hand in hers and gushed her thanks profusely.
Oh, thank you so much. My name is Chill, by the way. Thank you, boys, for saving me.
Chill seemed to be in her early 20s, and hardly seemed dressed for a trip through the desert. She looked like she could have walked off the runway of a fashion show.
Well, glad you're okay.
Chesney offered, dusting off his hands. He looked up to the road, to see Grunt with his arms crossed and looking impatient.
We should get going. It was nice meeting you, Chill.
The woman didn't take the hint at all, and joined them as they walked up to the road.
Oh, are you all coming to witness the public execution too? Yeah, something like that.
She smiled and nodded.
Same here. I rushed out the door as soon as I saw the posters back home.
The trio rejoined with Grunt, and started into the city. Once the woman started talking, it seemed like she didn't have an off switch. It didn't matter that they hardly responded or sometimes outright ignored her, but she kept right on talking like this was completely normal for her. There was no way to be rid of her without causing a huge scene, so for the time being, they just endured. Grunt kept eyeing Chesney with his signature glare, which Chesney was happy to ignore with his reflective helmet on. Inside Conshuta was like walking into Jurain, only a lot hotter, dustier, and lovelier. Every home, still egg-shaped, was made of polished tan stone and decorated with striking bold patterns. The entire city seemed to have been planned aesthetically from the outset. The streets were packed with stalls for shopping and food, and dozens of colorful banners hung over the streets for color, shade, and advertisements.
Is all this for the execution?
Chesney couldn't help but ask, incredulous awe in his voice.
Yep. The people have been really worried lately since the resistance has been throwing its weight around a lot more. So finally getting to see some justice done is a really welcome sight.
Just then, Chesney passed a set of posters glued to one of the walls. The poster was painted with flat, but vibrant colors and thick lines, immediately eye-catching red, and other complementary colors. It was depicting what he assumed to be the Great Ones, plus another person he assumed to be Zagos, looking up and pointing.
Zagos brought prosperity to Linus.
It read. It sickened him to see Sophie, Pormu, and Gabnid's legacy to be used for this awful propaganda. Fastia wasn't kidding. Zagos really was trying to push the image that he was on the same level as the immortals of Rega.
Oh, that's a new one.
Chill cried, rushing over to it.
My village just has a lot of the older ones. Goodness, it feels amazing being alive right now. Zagos, the second advent of Gabnid, emerges from history to unite all of Linus. He'll wipe out the resistance and Nasquat in one blow. Wow!
She giggled, making a punching motion. Chesney had no idea what to say to that, so they all just kept walking deeper into the city. They needed to find where this resistance fighter was, and form a plan to get her out. Now that they were within the confines of the city, the huge tower in the middle of it all dominated the skyline.
Let me guess. That's where they're keeping that resistance member?
Chesney speculated aloud. Grunt nodded.
Yup.
Chesney sighed.
Of course.
Chill chimed in.
Oh, don't get discouraged. I know. Why don't we see if we can go in and see her in person? That would be so cool.
Chesney laughed.
There's no way they just let anyone who wants to go see her up there.
Chill tilted her head.
Why not? It's part of the whole thing. See?
She pointed to a stall selling rotten, squishy vegetables for $1 apiece. Grunt stiffened. It was Chesney's turn to tilt his head in confusion.
What's that for? Who would buy that? It's gross.
Chill laughed, her voice like chimes.
Oh my word, is this your first time? Here.
She rushed over and paid for a handful, rushing back over.
You get to throw these at her. And don't worry, she's behind bars so we're totally safe.
Dumbly, Chesney opened his hand as she put one of the rotten vegetable in Ie. It was big and purple, with white mold growing out of one side. A thick, disgusting ooze was gently seeping from the side. Chill kept the others for herself.
First one's on me, cutie,
she said. Wait. What? He thought, completely unable to understand what was happening. They throw rotten food at her, while she can't fight back. For fun? He looked around again at all the families gleefully shopping, laughing together, preparing for the public execution. His head shook involuntarily, and his whole body felt like it wasn't listening to him anymore. Cormu's sword suddenly felt like it doubled in weight at his hip. It took everything in him not to grab the sword and start yelling at everyone to wake up. But at the same time, he felt a terrible weight in his heart as well. Is this what I'm fighting? He wanted to scream, and grab the nearest person and tell them they were insane. Tell them all they were crazy, for enjoying something like this. Chill put her hand on her hips and looked at them like they were completely clueless.
Okay. You guys are so lucky you found me. Follow me, I'll show you how one of these works.
Chill said, smiling genuinely and tugging them to follow her. The instant she touched Chesney's arm, he wanted to punch her in the face. His breathing was getting faster. His helmet was stifling.
Whoa! Cool sword, mister!
It took him several seconds to realize someone was talking to him. He looked down to see a little Fiorla boy, around Gig's age, maybe a bit younger.
Are you a soldier? When I grow up, I want to be a soldier too. Did you get to fight those Nasquat people?
Before he could even think to respond, Chill dragged him forward. He looked back to see the kid give him a salute. He wanted to vomit. Grunt came to his rescue. Quiet as a mouse, he was at his ear, and whispered,
Keep it together, kid. Don't do a damn thing until we find her.
That was right. No matter what, his number one priority had to be saving the resistance member. If he caused a scene, who knows what would happen next? Chill ran up to a random guard.
Oh, excuse me, sir. Sorry to bother you, but is the tower still open for visitors?
The guard, looking over at Chill and the rest of them, taking in their group and the rotten vegetables, eventually smiled and shook his head like he was looking at a couple of rowdy teenagers.
Ah, wanting to go see the prisoner too, eh? Yeah, it's still open. Her termination is until tomorrow. Top floor, at that back.
Chill thanked him in her most bubbly voice, and dragged them off towards the tower in the middle of town. The guard called after them.
Don't be pests to the staff there, you hear?
The tower was a huge edifice in the middle of town, surrounded by another wall, making for a large plaza that townsfolk could congregate in, all of it made from well-polished sandstone, though now there were stylized patterns carved into it, as well arrow slits all the way up the tower. Workers were busy setting up some kind of staging area in the wide open space there, though the process was too early to see what exactly they were making ready. He was absolutely sure he didn't want to know. Fearlessly, Chill led them into the grand double doors, engraved with some kind of holy figure that was presumably meant to represent Zagos, and into the tower. Inside, there was a few tourists who were looking at the wall exhibits, mostly of weaponry or miniature dioramas of past battles Chesney knew nothing about. The vast majority of people inside, though, were soldiers in full armor, walking about and performing their own duties. None batted an eye as they coiled around staircase after staircase, passing by tourists, going up and down as well. Grunt cursed under his breath.
How in oblivion and damnation are we going to get her out of here?
Even Gunny was starting to look a bit pale at the sheer number of people who were here. Chesney didn't know either, but act, as he promised. This was his mission. He was in charge, and he'd figure it out. One thing was for sure, it had to be done by tonight. Tomorrow was her termination. He still was horrified at the callousness of the guard's words when he spoke about it. At last, they approached the top of the tower, 6 stories up. There weren't even any guards here, only a row of empty cells, trailing into darkness at the end of the hall. One by one, they passed each cell, finding them empty. Chesney could feel Grunt tensing beside him. He couldn't blame him. Finally, they reached the last cell, and Chill looked inside. She laughed sweetly and melodiously.
Aha! How does it feel to be a traitor now, you stupid rebel scum? Look what your defiance of Lord Zagos has gotten you.
When Chesney saw what was in the cell, he froze in shock. A frail Doru woman with long ears and long cotton candy pink hair, somewhere in her late 20s, was chained to the wall by her hands above her head. Her thin wrists were raw and bloody from the manacles. The skin around her face was deep purple and swollen. Dozens of rotten vegetables lay strewn around the cell floor. Her body was covered in it, and her skin was turning red and sore from the unwashed filth. He almost retched just from the smell, and he had a helmet on. She looked very tired, and her face was streaked with tears. Parts of her clothes were dark with dried blood, though he couldn't see what wounds hid beneath them. When she looked up to see all of them, there was a combination of relief, fear, pleading, and possibly even guilt on her face. Her eyes seemed to want to say something, but with Chill there, and Chesney, she apparently dared not say anything in case it would reveal too much. Gunny looked away. Grunt looked like he would have ripped the bars in half if he could. Chesney's mind was spinning, trying to think of how in the world they were going to get this woman out of this cell, out of the tower, past all the guards, out the busy streets, and back to the resistance base without sounding any alarms. With this termination happening tomorrow, the best thought he had was sneaking in the middle of the night and using his magic to sneak in, steal the key, get in the cell, and use his magic to have them escape. They could spend some time during the festivities this afternoon staking out the place, and maybe finding out if there were some weaknesses they could take advantage of. While he was thinking, Chill continued to mock the Doru woman, oblivious to anything else.
Nyaya?
She cried, sticking out her tongue.
Gods, you stink, you damn traitor. Don't you rebel scum know how to take a bath? Hey?
Before anyone could react, Chill took one of the rotten vegetables in her arms and threw it at the woman. She gasped in surprise and shrunk away, though she couldn't move because of her restraints. The awful sound of the impact made Chesney jump. His body tensed and wouldn't let go. It was like his mind couldn't connect what was happening anymore. The pressure of the escape plan, Medea, waiting for him, the insane cruelty of the townsfolk, the sheer awfulness of this woman, who he had saved, and every single cut, bruise, and stain on this poor resistance fighter's body. It was all too much for him to take.
Ah ha ha ha, loser. You'll get what's coming to you.
Chill teased with glee, launching another vegetable. The prisoner cried out in pain, and a thwack noise made Chesney's body jolt again. Grunt, stuck between the horror of seeing his partner literally tortured in front of him, when he was powerless to do anything, and knowing that if he made the slightest show of concern that he was possibly dooming everyone, trembled in barely concealed rage.
I think we should head back.
Gunny tried to say.
What? But we just got here. Come on, have some fun.
Chill replied. She turned to Chesney.
Hey, you didn't throw yours yet.
Please, no. Great ones. Does she expect me to? Am I really going to? Chill looked at Chesney quizzically.
Everything all right?
Chesney looked at the rotten, disgusting thing in his hand. If he didn't do it, she would start to connect the dots. He looked up at Grunt. His expression was beyond words. 1,000 desperate pleas danced behind his one good eye. Chesney looked over at the woman, battered and bloody in the cell. A moment of silence passed between them that seemed to drag on for dozens of seconds. There was a look in her eyes that he never wanted to see on another person ever again. It seemed to say, "It's okay. I know. You can do it." For a brief moment, he imagined the woman in the cell was Medea, covered in rotten garbage, beaten, bloody, shackled, looking at him with pleading eyes, trying to endure the shame. Would he have the strength to stand there, like Grunt, and endure seeing it all happen and not react? His mind screamed. The quiet disgust and rage that had been building inside him boiled over in that instant. His fist squished the disgusting thing in his gloved hand, and the next instant, he punched Chill in the face with it. The woman was not expecting it in the least, and was knocked to the floor in a spin.
"Gunny, get that cell open,"
Chesney hissed. Gunny obliged, moving over to the cell door and trying to use his incredible strength to get the door off its hinges. Grunt, though, stepped in front of him with terror in his eyes.
"Kid, what are you doing? This isn't a plan. You're going to get us all killed." "No,"
he said, grimly.
"I'm done being nice. I'm done playing along. If the people of Sasquatch want to act like monsters."
He looked down at Chill, still dazed and prone of the floor. He had never hated anyone or anything in his life more than he felt in this single moment.
"I'll treat them like monsters."
Grunt wasn't impressed.
"This still isn't a plan." "Yes, it is. The plan is, get behind me, and stay out of my way."
Grunt rubbed his face in worry, then shook his head and growled.
"Off. Damn it. Fine. Gunny, out of the damn way. I can pick it."
Dutifully, Gunny moved aside, and Grunt got to work on the lock.
"You realize you've just gotten us all killed? Do you really think you can fight your way out of this whole city, kid? You're not an army."
Chesney cracked his knuckles.
"You have no idea what I'm capable of, but you're about to find out."
With surprising deftness considering the situation, Grunt got the cell door open in moments, and ran to the woman's side to start on her restraints. Other prison door locks weren't considered to be particularly important given the garrison below, or he was just that good. Chill staggered to her feet, rage in her eyes as she looked at Chesney.
"How dare you! I should have known. Every damn Doru is a traitor to Lord Zagos. I'll kill you traitors myself,"
she screamed, and ripped a dagger from her bag, lunging at him. Easily, Gunny reached out a gigantic hand and closed it around the woman's whole neck, stopping her instantly. She squawked in surprise.
"Sorry, miss,"
he said, and casually tossed her against the far wall. Coughing and sputtering, Chill once more got to her feet. Seeming to finally understand the situation she was in, she spat.
"I won't be humiliated by the likes of you."
She dashed down the stairs, shouting at the top of her lungs.
"The resistance is here. Help! Everyone, stop them."
Gunny looked worried. Chesney unsheathed his sword. For the first time in a long time, he felt up to the task of wielding it. In another moment, Grunt got the woman out of her restraints. With gentle hands, he brushed off the filth, handed her a pill from his own bottle of ibuprofen, and gently eased her to her feet.
"Oh, Wind, what did they do to you?"
Wind embraced Grunt and let out a sob. He softly patted her dirty pink hair.
"I'm so sorry, Runt. I had to tell them everything. About our plans to blow up the rope network. I tried to hold on for as long as I could, but it was all too much. And now, I'm putting you all in danger. Again. For my sake." "Shh! That's enough of that. Don't be sorry, Wind. I should have known after your last report that you should have come straight back. I put you in this mess. I'm so sorry."
Just then, a shrill repeating alarm siren started to blare out from every direction. Shouting and footsteps could be heard from down the steps. Chesney turned to Wind.
"Wind, my name is Chesney. Everything is going to be okay. Can you fight?"
Tired and beaten as she was, she still nodded and looked at him resolutely.
"Yes, a bit. We all get combat training in the Resistance, though I was really more meant to be an infiltration spy. I'm really good at using bolt, if it helps.
Chesney nodded, then turned to everyone. He shouted, feeling the weight of command like a familiar blanket for once.
Okay, listen up. Runt. You protect Wind. Gunny. Watch my back.
He turned to face the stairs. Part of him wondered how it was he managed to get into the same situation twice now.
There's one speed. Minin. There is one direction. Through. And nobody gets left behind.
At last, 3 guards ran up the stairs and beheld the 4 of them. None of them looked unseasoned, or poorly equipped. They all had the eyes of veterans. All their eyes locked instantly on Chesney.
Surrender now or die. Rebel scum.
Coldly, Chesney pointed his sword right at them. He screamed in rage and charged.
No mercy.
From his hand, a bolt of lightning erupted and caught all 3 of them, stunning them for just long enough for Chesney to close the distance in. He slashed the throat of the first, and stabbed the second in the heart, his sword going through the guard's armor like it wasn't even there. The final guard slashed at his head, but it bounced off uselessly when the helmet pushed his head back to make the angle too shallow. Chesney grabbed both sides of the guard's head.
Break!
He cried, and from that close range, the reality-tearing magic exploded the man's entire skull in gore. Wind gasped in awe.
Is that truly Cormu's equipment?
Equally in shock, Runt said.
Evidently.
From the base of the stairs to his left, a bolt of lightning blasted Chesney back a step. A single Fiorella spiritualist stood at the base of the stairs, readying another.
Pathetic.
Chesney cried, pointed his own hand down at her and blasted her with his own bolt. She was knocked away, spinning to the floor, a large chunk of her unarmored body missing.
Come on,
he shouted, and ran down the stairs. Stunned at the display, the others took a second to respond, but then quickly ran after him. At the base of the stairs, another 2 guards flanked him. He grabbed one, shouted,
Break!
While slamming him against a wall. The wall exploded outwards, and the guard was thrown out into the open air, screaming. The second guard took the opportunity to land a solid blow to Chesney's back with his sword. It didn't pierce, but the strength of the blow was enough to almost knock the wind out of him. Still, it wasn't going to be enough to stop him or even slow him down. Not today. Spinning around to face the guard, Chesney slashed upwards with Cormu's sword. The guard's belly sliced open in a spray of blood and gore, and he fell to the ground unmoving. Another 6 guards pounded around the corner. They balked at the sight of the mutilated guard beside him. That moment of hesitation was more than long enough. With a hand, Chesney gestured towards them, and a massive gust of flame enveloped the whole group. The screams were terrible, but the smell was worse. When all 6 were silent, blackened heaps, Chesney ran around the corner and headed for the next staircase, the others trailing just behind him.
Where did you find this guy?
Wind asked through breaths, worn out from the exertion after being restrained for so long.
Maybe took his friend hostage,
Grunt said, feeling less confident in his decision-making skills.
I'm starting to see why he wasn't exactly scared of us. You did what?
Wind shouted, slightly terrified.
It's fine. We'll talk later,
Chesney shouted.
Stay behind me.
They managed to make it down the stairs without being attacked, but the next floor was much more open, and over a dozen soldiers started running at Chesney immediately. Thankfully, they were uncoordinated and ran at him, mostly one at a time. With fluid grace, he slashed his sword and parried with precise movement, and all around him blood and limbs flew away. He was like a boat gently parting the river before him. The ones still left alive as he passed groaned in pain and shock on the floor, and did not attempt to rise again. The boy dispatched enemies almost as fast as his companions could keep up with him.
By Cormu, it's like seeing legends made real,
Wind said, looking at the devastation left in their wake. By the time they got to the stairs, one shaking guard stood in their way. He dropped his sword and tried to run, but Chesney blasted him in the back with another lightning bolt, and he went careening down the stairs. He landed at the base of the stairs in a mangled heap, unmoving. They reached the bottom of the stairs, now on the 3rd floor, and found a squad of 3 soldiers in black armor, supported by 2 spiritualist old men in black robes, waiting for them. Chesney placed a hand to his chest, and applied the magic reflecting spell to himself just in time for a twin barrage of lightning and fire to assail him. As angry as he was, he could barely feel the pain. The spiritualists, however, screamed in surprise as their attacks backfired on them, and their robes smoldered. Unperturbed, the trio of guards surrounded him. When they dove in to strike him at once, Chesney snapped his fingers, and the entire room was filled with explosions. The guards, spiritualists, and even the walls were cracked, blown apart, and blown away. Mercilessly, he ran to each of them and stabbed them as they lay on the floor, stunned. The coast clear, he uncapped his bottle of ibuprofen and took a pillow. Instantly, he was feeling completely healed and rejuvenated, and ran forward once more. Down another floor, to floor 2. They were almost out. Another half-dozen guards were waiting, this time somewhat reluctant to approach. Chesney, covered in blood and wearing the legendary hero Cormuz things, apparently struck something on an intimidating figure. They stood in a ready stance with swords and shield, and shifted uneasily, looking amongst themselves.
Tell you what, I won't even use magic,
Chesney growled excitedly. He took his favorite stance, and added,
Run, though, and you'll regret it.
The bravest 2 approached him from the front. The others started to circle him, hoping to box him in and take him out with sheer numbers. Rather than let that happen, Chesney bull rushed the first of the 2 that approached, knocking him back a step with a shoulder check to the shield, and slashing at the other. The other frontliner put up his shield in time, and lost half of it in the process.
What is that sword?
The man exclaimed, looking in shock at his broken shield. At this point, one of the others who had begun to circle around came at Chesney from behind. The swing glanced off his back, being pushed aside by the mysterious force that enveloped the armor. For his trouble, Chesney swung around and lopped off the man's head before he could recover.
Rads, no! You bastard!
One of the others cried, dashing in at Chesney madly. Chesney dropped to the floor, and swept his legs out from under him. Just as Chesney was getting to his feet, 2 more slashed down at him. With one arm he blocked it with his shield, the other he sliced the blade off cleanly, cutting the man's neck. With garbled screams, the man went down, trying in vain to hold in the blood. 2 down, 4 to go. Before the one who was tripped could get up, Chesney repositioned himself and kicked out at the man's face. He fell again, covering his face as blood gushed from his nose.
Dirty little!
One of the others cried, leaping over the prone man and bringing down his sword in a strong lunge. Chesney blocked with his shield, and was knocked onto his back. The incensed man dove on him, but Chesney planted his feet on his stomach and tossed him backwards. Using the momentum of the throw, he rolled to his feet and caught another sword strike with his sword just in time from one of the other 2 who were still standing. He parried the blow with the flat of his blade, and drove Cormuz's sword straight through the guard's chest. 3. Unceremoniously, he walked over to the man with the bloody nose and drove his sword deep into his back. 4. The remaining 2 looked at each other in fear. The one he had tossed got to his feet, and said,
We need backup,
and turned to run away. His comrade quickly joined in. Chesney clicked his tongue in disapproval.
Freeze, cowards!
He shouted at the retreating forms, and they both stopped instantly, frozen in time.
You just lost your chance.
A slice to each neck, and a few moments later time resumed, and their heads rolled. He turned to the others.
Next floor and we're out. Come on!
The blaring sirens continued to wail from everywhere, but he could still hear the flurry of activity coming from the room below. People shouting, screaming, footsteps rushing everywhere.
Stay up there for a second,
he called back, and went down alone. The first floor was a rush of soldiers trying to usher out all the civilians who had been evacuating the tower. Half saw him and prepared to fight. The other half stayed focused on getting the last few extremely elderly people out. Chesney crossed his arms and waited. Once they were out, Chesney gestured to the great double doors.
Close them. Shut the doors. Cut off their escape.
2 soldiers did as they were instructed, and shut the 2 double doors tight, and everyone turned to face him.
Thanks. I didn't want to have any leaks,
he said, then threw both hands outward and shouted. Like a tidal wave, a massive wall of flames erupted from him and filled the massive room with fire. Once the fire reached the arrow slits in the walls and other windows, the flames whipped and roared like howling beasts and shot out in great streams of fire. The screams managed to still be heard, though. Once things had quieted, he pulled back the flames, then fell to his knees, gasping for breath.
You can. Come down. Now,
he tried to say between breaths. He fumbled at his belt for another pill, took it, and dusted ashes off himself. The trio came down the stairs, looked around and shook their heads in amazement. The floor was etched with burnt marks radiating away from where Chesney stood, and all around him in heaps were bodies trying to crawl towards or away from them.
I think that's the last of them,
Chesney said, dusting himself off.
Everyone's still okay?
They nodded, dumbly, still unable to completely process what was going on.
Home stretch. Come on,
Chesney shouted, then ran to the doors and kicked the smoldering doors wide open. The plaza in front of the tower was filled with concerned civilians, standing in groups, talking amongst themselves worriedly. Everything fell silent as they saw Chesney step out of the doors and a plume of smoke. A pack of teenagers called out hopefully,
Did you get the traitors?
When the trio emerged behind him, the crowd gasped. To Chesney's complete shock, nobody ran away. Instead, a roar of anger erupted around the crowd, and shouts for their blood came from every throat. Groups of able-bodied men, women, and teenagers took out weapons, or anything else lying around, and charged ahead.
For Lord Zagos! For Lord Zagos!
Fine by me, you monstrous scum! With a battle cry of his own, Chesney screamed,
No mercy!
And ran towards the crowd. He really wished Medea was around for that speed-up spell of hers, but he'd make do. Relentlessly, he started firing group-level spell after group-level spell, usually lightning, into the crowd. Anyone who got close took a slash from the sword. Gunny ran up behind him and started swatting away anyone who tried to sneak in from behind.
Thanks, Gunny!
Chesney shouted.
Anytime, kid!
The crowd was mad with bloodlust, and Chesney was all too happy to return their hate in kind. No amount of seeing their comrades fall before him dissuaded their own insane charge to take him down. A hand swung a wicked butcher's cleaver down at his neck. He dodged to the side, and lopped off the man's forearm for his trouble. 2 teenage girls leapt at him and clawed at his helmet to remove it, and he burned them both back with a massive gust of flames. A full-on pot of boiling stew was lobbed at him from the back of the crowd. He sliced it in half, and the surrounding townsfolk screamed in pain as the scalding hot liquid showered them. Somehow, someone got between him and Gunny because mid-swing to a foe, something light smacked into his back, and a knife was at his throat.
Die, stupid jerk,
came a strange voice. Chesney spun in rage, and slashed at the figure behind him. To his utter shock and horror, he saw the same child that had saluted him before falling away from him. There was a terrible slash across his cheek, and the child looked to be either stunned or completely unconscious. Before he could see more, the child was lost in the mess of bodies attacking him. Even a child tried to. Did I kill a child? For just a fraction of a second, it was as though time stopped, and a cold feeling of horror and disgust crashed down upon him. This is enough. No more.
Enough,
He screamed, louder than he ever knew he could. Even the crowd's push abated for just a moment as they paused to hear what he was about to say. Chesney thrust his hand into the air, and an incredibly bright light started to crackle and flash there in a great ball. His body began to rise in the air, supported by dozens of bolts of lightning. None of this was necessary for the spell, but this moment called for spectacle, if he wanted people to pay attention.
Anyone who doesn't want to die, start running.
Wind, Gunny, and Grunt ran to surround Chesney, weapons out, keeping the crowd at bay. The siren's wail began to mix in with another sound. A shrieking, howling noise filled the air as the great ball of light grew larger and larger. The whole plaza was thrown into bright light and pure shadow. Chesney put everything he had left into this last attack. He'd easily filled the minimum required life for this spell, but he intended this to be his final word, and nobody but the most awful and bloodthirsty needed to die. Anyone still in the blast radius when he was done deserved to die. The great ball of light began to rise higher and higher in the air. More and more of the city was cast in its light, and the sky began to darken with thick clouds. At last, the people of Consciuto took the hint that this was a fight they wouldn't win. Most of the most able-bodied men, women, and children started running out of the plaza, and down the main thoroughfare of the city for the town's exit. Some stayed behind though, even now, and Chesney's companions fought valiantly to hold them back. Dozens of forms, not quite dead, or dying, or just stunned from having lost limbs, squirmed on the ground and tried to move away, but it was pointless. Not a single of the runners helped them. So be it.
No mercy for monsters. This is justice,
Chesney cried, finally releasing the power that had been building. He slammed down to the ground, slamming his fist into the middle of the plaza. The next instant, the great ball of light exploded in a torrent of massive lightning bolts that mercilessly crashed into every part of the city of Consciuto. Over and over, bolts of lightning blasted into the city, shattering walls, windows, and fleeing townsfolk. As though they were covered in an invisible spherical wall, the four of them were completely unharmed by the gargantuan attack.
Is this truly the power of a master spiritualist?
Wind asked herself, breathlessly watching the carnage unfold. In a few seconds, it was all over. What was once a town filled to bursting with life was now a silent ghost town. No, a graveyard. Chesney collapsed to the ground, panting for breath. Had he really just done all of that by himself? The rage that had fueled him from the moment he saw the townsfolk gaily preparing for an execution, of Wind's treatment at the hands of Zagos's forces, and the shame in Grunt's eyes at his own inability to save the one he loved. It had all been spent, and more. The plaza was silent, utterly silent, except for his panting. He had used almost everything he had without killing himself. His vision was dark around the edges. It had been a long time since he had pushed himself that far. Footstep. Grunt kneeled down in front of him.
You okay, kid? That was... well, I've never seen anything like it. And I hope I never have to see it again.
Chesney didn't respond, and it was difficult to focus. All he wanted to do was sleep, and fall through the empty space of the ground and never wake up again. If this was the world he was forced to live in. He closed his eyes.
Now, stay with me, boy.
There was a sound of rattling, and a smooth object was placed against his lips.
Come on. You have a lady friend who's waiting for you.
Medea. That's right. I can't sleep yet. Chesney's lips parted, and accepted the medicine. Like a sledgehammer hitting him, he felt his whole body jolt with the rejuvenating power the miraculous medicine possessed. After a moment, he returned to his feet, and beheld the destruction he had wrought. Behind them, the tower. He could see the hole he had broken through at the top, as well as various singe marks around the upper floor windows, and the bottom floor windows. The middle floor was blown out too. The plaza was a mess of still forms, blood, limbs, and smoking craters. All over the town, Plumes of smoke rose quietly in the air, like ghosts freshly risen over a battlefield. They began to walk out of town. All along the path, on sidewalks, in doorways, and alleys, were bodies of those who couldn't escape in time. Merchant carts were overturned, toys and banners and food crushed into pieces on the street. Once they reached the outer gate, Chesney took out a cloth and began to wipe down the blade and clean the blood from his helmet and armor. But there, outside the city limits, all the remaining townsfolk had gathered. They clumped together in terrified family groups, and when they saw Chesney and his companions, all backed far away. In their eyes was a mixture of hatred and fear. None spoke up, nor moved towards them. All had their fill of violence and death. And so, silently, Chesney and his companions walked into the desert sands, and disappeared. When the great storm gathered in the east, and brought forth such terrible lightning, Medea stood vigil at the mouth of the cave and watched. She waited for hours, until the sun fell to slumber and the skies grew dark and cold. Fiery, the Fiorella woman who had approached them earlier with promises to watch over her in Chesney's stead, was never too far from Medea's side. She wasn't sure if that was because it was her job to keep watch, or from genuine concern, not that it mattered. She was there all the same. But she felt the woman's presence was meant to be a soothing one, so she didn't resent her. It was all too easy to feel lonely here, without him by her side. It had hurt so terribly to watch him walk away from her, like a part of her soul was torn from her and longed to be whole again. Journeying with Chesney was hard enough, unable to fully express her feelings, but being apart was even more unbearable.
Why haven't they returned? They should have been back by now,
she fretted, shivering in the cool night air. Fiery, the picture of calm serenity, leaned on the side of the cave mouth with her arms crossed.
Consciuto is a lot farther than you think, Medea. There's no way they'd be able to make it back before nightfall, so they probably set up camp somewhere.
Medea wasn't convinced. She wrung her hands and said,
But Fiery, he should be able to warp here no problem. What if that means something happened to him? What if they're captured? Or he was hurt? Or...
She was interrupted by a soft hand on her shoulder.
Hey now, hold on. Let's not borrow tomorrow's troubles for today, okay? But, if they're captured, we need to, Hush. Now, I need you to tell me something, and be honest. This Chesney boy, you trust him, don't you? Of course I do. With my life. My everything. Then, trust in him. Do you think there's anything in this whole world that would keep him from getting back here to you?
Medea looked out into the darkness. If their roles were reversed, and she had gone in his stead, would there be any way she would fail and die before seeing him again? Even if an army stood in her way, she would find a way. And though she didn't fully know how he felt about her, if he felt the same things for her as she did for him, she knew without doubt that the connection between them was strong. He would return.
No, nothing,
she said at last.
I thought so. So, come on. Let's go inside where it's warm, get some food before bed. And, I'd love to know more about you two. Tell you what. I'll even tell you how I got all mixed up in the resistance, okay?
Fiery led her back inside the cave, sparing a moment to turn her own worried glance at the cave mouth. End of chapter.